One of the things I found fascinating was when we were talking about child reflexes and how that has a massive impact.
Yeah, that's the world of neurodevelopmental therapy. It was originally put together by a guy called Dr. Peter Blythe down in Chester, an organisation called INPP. When we were first conceived and the way that the body then develops for those 9 months in utero, we have a whole bunch of reflexes called primitive reflexes, which allow the baby to move and develop in the womb. They then assist that child to be born naturally into the world. And then they're really designed for that child to survive the first 6 to 12 months of life. But in that 6 to 12 months, there's development that should happen that begin to either inhibit the continued activity of those reflexes, or they transform to a more adult-like form of themselves. So for example, one of them is called a palmar reflex. And if you have a brand new baby and you put something in the baby's hand, the first thing a baby will do is grab a hold. But it doesn't know that it's doing it. You know, everybody thinks, oh, the baby loves me, but the baby's not got a clue what's going on, which is also why babies can't actually choose to let go. And you've got to really prize yourself out of that grasp, because they're very strong, these reflexes. They're survival mechanisms. That should really be inhibited in that first 6 to 12 months. If it hasn't been, then it continually stays active, and that can interfere with future development moving forward. So this example means that the child's development of fine motor skills to learn to do things like brush their teeth, put their clothes on, tie their shoelaces, control a pencil or a paintbrush or a crayon, become much more limited for these kids. So if you address the underlying physical barrier, you free up and open up the access to these kids to move on in their life.
And can you remove that reflex?
It's not so much removing it, it's inhibiting it, so that you and I both have our primitive reflexes in our central nervous system. They're just dormant. They're just not active at all because they've been superseded because of experience, good genetics, hopefully. I'm not sure. Good lifestyle or whatever. So we've got much more control over ourselves. We've got voluntary control over what we do. Those who have a cluster of primitive reflexes, that's involuntary control. So it'll just fire up whenever it decides it needs to, rather than because you want it to. And that's the difference.
So when you're testing a 3 or 4-year-old, is there certain reflexes that you look for? Is there a group of 5 telltale reflexes?
There's 14 primitive reflexes that you can test once a child is born. And stuff. There is something called a gag reflex as well, which is when babies can be born in water because they automatically know how to hold their breath. But I don't test for that. There's no reason for me to test for that. No swimming pool in the clinic. That's what it is. Yeah, no hydrotherapy. Not where I live. Those 14 reflexes are a whole bunch of reflexes that can be tactile, so stimulated by touch. Ones that are balance driven, and ones that are tonic neck. So wherever the position the head is in, what does the body do in response, for example? So those 14 reflexes you can test very specifically. And again, it was Peter Blythe and a colleague called David McGlone who came up with the testing procedures for this based on past research from many, many decades ago. And they've just really pieced it all together to what we now know as the INPP method.